Alright guys, so here we are in Paint 3D. Again, if you need to find it, you're going to come down to the bottom of your screen to the search bar, type in Paint. We're looking for Paint 3D, that is the updated version. Paint without the 3D is kind of the retro version. So we're going to stick with the new one. And then when you get in, you click New, and that will open up a new project for you. So we already played with your brush and 2D shape tools. If you've missed that, the demo is on my YouTube channel. Today we're going to talk about how to make something look three-dimensional in Paint. And I know it might be tempting to use the 3D shapes, but right now we're going to practice how to do it yourself. Okay, so I know that you can use 3D shapes in Paint 3D, but I also want you to know how to do it yourself. So, one thing to remember about Paint, unlike some more advanced digital art tools, you cannot rearrange the layers. So if you want something in the background, you need to put it in first. All right, so I'm going to start by making a horizontal line, and so that is in my 2D shapes. I chose a line. I'm going to like this color, and when you're choosing a color here, so you have your pre-selected paint palette, and then you also have this row down here. If you double click, you can get into the color selector so that you can choose any color you like. All right, so then I'm going to go back to brushes and get the fill tool. Now I'm going to grab this. This color that I just created is down here, but also if it's not down there, you can always grab a color that's already in your artwork with the eyedropper. So I take the eyedropper, I hover over that color, and now I have that same color. So I'm going to take the fill tool and fill that in, and now I'm also going to give myself a background color. Okay. All right, so now I have my basic setting. I'm going to imagine that this is a table with a wall in the background. Now I'm going to go back to 2D shapes. So right now I'm just going to show you basically how to make something that looks like a sphere. So I'm going to start with a circle, and so I'm going to make kind of a squashed circle, and I know it looks invisible right now. I'm going to change this color so you can see it. That looks good to me. So I have an outline. I'm going to add fill, so I have a solid shadow there. I can move it around if I need to, get it in the right spot. Once I click away from it, it will not be movable. So I'm going to check mark, and now I'm going to take another circle and make a not squashed circle. And let's see, what color do I want this to be? A nice golden yellow. I'm going to get rid of that outline, and now I'm going to make sure it's kind of in the right spot. It should be sitting on the end of that shadow. It shouldn't be all the way over. It should be within the shadow towards one side of it. All right, so now I have my setup. This is the basis of my shape, and now I'm going to add some shading to make it look three-dimensional. So I'm going to go back to brushes, and I'm going to use watercolor. You could also use the spray can tool. Watercolor has kind of a dappled texture, whereas spray can is a little more even. Just be careful with spray can about how far you're spraying it. I would reduce the thickness of your spray can if you're using that one. So, and you do want to be careful of both your thickness and your opacity, whether you're using watercolor or spray can. So I'm going to start with a smaller thickness just to be sure. So I'm imagining that my light source is coming from up here, this corner, right? So I'm going to put in a highlight, right? And just as a reminder, you do all, I believe, have touchscreen computers. So you're going to get some much smoother lines if you use your finger, all right, rather than your trackpad or your mouse. So I'm going to reduce my opacity here. I got a pretty bright highlight there, and with the reduced opacity, I'm going to kind of fade it out, and I'll reduce it even more. The more you reduce the opacity, the more gradual of a shading you're going to get. Right, the more you go over the same spot, the darker it'll get. I'm going to increase my thickness now so I can get a broader stroke. Right, kind of smooth this highlight out and spiral outwards. All right, now I'm going to grab a slightly darker orangey yellow, and I'm going to swirl that into this mid-tone. So it looks like my yellow is getting slightly darker in the middle there. I'm going to increase my opacity a little bit and continue. You do want to be careful. Another downside of paint is that you can't, I can't make a selection so that my paint doesn't go off the edges of that circle, which is a little, so you just have to be kind of careful not to go off the edge. All right, so I'm going to keep kind of going over the same spots that I want to be darker. Increase my opacity again, make it even darker. And now I'm going to switch to a gray, reduce my opacity again. And especially in the middle where you're not too worried about going off the edge of that sphere, you can increase your thickness to get a more gradual. And then towards the edge, I'm going to make it smaller so I can kind of get my details in there. So I'm just kind of, based on how it looks, adjusting my opacity and my thickness to kind of blend. You know, I'm trying to get the smoothest I can to blend that. You can also bring some shadows into the shadow you've already created. Your shadow is going to be darker when it's closer to the object. So just adding some shading near the object there. And right now I'm just trying to get a little bit closer to that edge. It's okay to have a little bit of a highlight. It's called reflected light. Sometimes you see a little bit of that light coming around the other side. So it's okay if you don't get it exactly all the way to the edge. All right, so now I have a pretty decent looking sphere. And you can also apply this technique to other shapes, to other organic shapes, just keeping in mind where your light is coming from. So you want to make sure you're always imagining your light source, keeping it consistent through one piece of artwork, so the light is always going to be coming from the same place, even if you have multiple objects. And just keeping it light near the light source and gradually getting darker away from the light source. It's also a good idea to use curving lines. So I was kind of swirling around the circularness of this circle instead of making straight lines across. That straight lines will flatten it out, whereas if you use kind of curving lines, they'll wrap around your object and make it look more round. So there you have it. That's how you make something look round in paint.